Late last year, I put out a video ranking my top 25 favorite roller coasters I had ridden in Europe. This came after my first trip to the continent where I spent 7 weeks road tripping from Denmark to Switzerland and many countries in between. This summer, I got to go back to Europe for a shorter 2-week trip, and this was focused around riding coasters in countries I didn't get around to last time. My buddy Josiah and I rode upwards of 60 new roller coasters each, which brings the total number of coasters I've ridden in Europe from 179 to 243. Now, not only is the total number of coasters I've ridden in Europe far greater than it used to be, but I found that I ranked some rides too low and some rides too high on my old list. So after really thinking those over, I feel that I have a more accurate opinion this time. Of the 64 new coasters I rode in Europe this year, 10 of them made the top 25, which is absolutely amazing to think about. But this does mean that 10 coasters that were on the old list are no longer on here. So I did want to give them a quick honorable mention. These rides are all great, but just barely missed the cut. Carajo at our Leibniz Park Trips Drill, Skywheel at Skyline Park, and while we're at it, let me shout out the other 2 Skyloop coasters I rode on my most recent trip to Europe, Abismo at Parque de Atracciones de Madrid, and Uco at Linnenmaki. Phoenix at Toverland, Goliath at Walibi Holland, Lena at Fairham Summerland, Colossus Camp der Giganten at Haida Park, Abyssus at Energylandia, Fury at Bobbejaanland, Troy at Toverland, and Black Mamba at Phantasialand. I'd also like to mention what countries I've been to for those of you who are new around here. I have ridden the majority of notable roller coasters in Poland, Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, France, Spain, Sweden, Norway, and Finland. If your favorite ride didn't make this list, I either haven't ridden it, maybe it didn't quite make the top 25, or maybe I don't think it's that great. It comes without saying that we all have different opinions, and I don't expect any of your lists to be the same as mine. But if you have been to Europe, let me know what your favorite roller coasters are. I would love to hear about it in the comment section below. Anyways, with that all being said, let's dive in. Starting things off at the number 25 spot is Furious Baco at Portaventura. We're kicking things off with a controversial ride. Some people love Furious Baco, and some people hate it. Mostly this is the case because of the ride maybe not being the smoothest, but personally, I didn't think it was that rough at all. I understand that I have a higher tolerance for roughness than most, but if you can look past that, there's a lot to love about this ride. Furious Baco is Intamin's only attempt at a true wing coaster, and this one is unique in that it was the first to feature a launch. And talk about a way to start the ride. Furious Baco accelerates riders from 0 to 83.9 miles per hour in 3.5 seconds. From there, you've got a bunch of low-to-the-ground turns, a single inversion, which is a great element by the way, and a swooping turn over the water. There's no doubt that this coaster is short, but I don't mind it so much when it rides action-packed the whole way through, and Furious Baco is absolutely no exception. Number 24, Phoenix at Fairham Summerland. Ever since this ride opened last year, Phoenix has become a real fan favorite in Europe, and I can by all means understand why. This ride is so much fun. It was the first of this layout we've seen built from Vekoma, and what we're looking at here is a height of 131 feet, 3 inversions, and many points of airtime. To be honest, I didn't find Phoenix to be an intense ride at all, but it's silky smooth and so fluid the way it goes from one element to the next. And though its forces aren't the strongest, it's got an incredible variety of it, which easily compensates in my opinion. Not to mention, it's just a beautiful coaster, one that I loved taking pictures and videos of. Number 23, Stuntfall at Parque Warner Madrid. Vekoma giant inverted boomerangs are few and far between these days. I got to ride my first ever one at Silverwood Theme Park in Idaho, so I already knew what to expect with Stuntfall, but that doesn't make it any less good. So few people are ever going to ride both Stuntfall and Aftershock, so the fact that it's a clone doesn't bother me in the slightest. The forces these rides pull will catch any experienced coaster rider by surprise. It's insane how hard this thing pushes you down into your seat from the positive forces. It genuinely feels like you're being squished. And what's nice is all the operating giant inverted boomerangs are smooth enough to enjoy, not glass smooth or anything, there definitely is a bite to it, but in my opinion it adds a lot to the intensity of Stuntfall. Number 22, Piraten at Jur Summerland. Piraten is a coaster that took a couple rides before I really started to feel it out, but once it had warmed up, I definitely understood the hype. It's the only mega light coaster Intamin ever built outside of Asia, and the whole point with this is it would be a smaller ride than a full-scale mega coaster that would mimic the intense airtime and pacing. Piraten only stands 101 feet tall, but it throws you around. My favorite part are these 3 whippy twisted airtime hills, which are honestly stronger than airtime you get on most hyper coasters. So I'm definitely a big fan of this thing. It's one of those coasters I could ride all day long without getting bored. Number 21, Balder at Liseberg. When I first rode this coaster, I actually drew some comparisons to Piraten, but in wooden form, and that explains why its ranking is just one spot apart. They're both built by Intamin, they're both around 100 feet tall, but they pack in so much airtime it is incredible. When we were with Pontus of Liseberg, he told us that they built Balder for the airtime, and that was abundantly clear after riding.
We built it because of the airtime.
You are launched out of your seat over and over and over again. Some might say it's repetitive, but I love it. If there is a downside with this ride, it has a little bit of dead space in between the bunny hills where there's not really a whole lot going on. But I can't say it bothered me too much because it kind of built anticipation before each airtime moment. Baldur was a ton of fun and another one of those immensely re-rideable coasters. Number 20, Flucht von Novgorod at Hansa Park. I think this is one of the most underrated roller coasters in Europe because what it packs into its layout, only 2,200 feet long, is astounding. It's part dark ride, part coaster, and the coaster elements it has are extremely intense. One of these moments is the fastest acceleration of any LSM launch in the world, 62.1 miles per hour in 1.4 seconds. It's also got a few moments of powerful ejector airtime, a singular inversion, and an in the dark section at the end where I had no idea what was going on. Hansa Park tied the already epic layout together with a compelling dark story and so much awesome theming. Don't overlook Flucht von Novgorod if you're visiting Germany for theme parks. And from one of the most underrated coasters in Europe to one that's maybe a bit overrated, I'm sorry, number 19 is Terran at Phantasialand. Look, I do really like this ride. I adore its launches, I think it's got a very creative layout, and it has some of the best theming on a coaster I've seen. But Terran is not an extreme thrill ride like I expected and like many people make it out to be. I wouldn't go as far as to call it a family coaster either, but the forces Terran pulls are not very intense at all. Not to mention that end of each half of this ride do drag on a little bit. But what do you expect? Phantasialand had to think way outside the box when it came to squeezing an intimate multi-launch coaster into their park. So I can't be too disappointed. Terran is an architectural and engineering marvel, and I do think it's a fun coaster for sure. It wouldn't have made this list if it wasn't. But personally, it's not one of my absolute favorite coasters in Europe like it is for a lot of people. Number 18, Helix at Liseberg. My first few rides on this coaster, I got off disappointed the same way I was with Terran. But once I had tried it in a few more seats and the ride had started to warm up, Helix had grown on me more than just about any coaster I've ridden. It's still not as good as some people say, but it's not as weak as others say. Helix has certainly become pretty divisive in recent years. But I'll tell you what, few rides have a more unique layout than Helix. It follows the terrain pretty much the entire ride, and at 4,500 feet in length, it's a long experience too. Plus, it's got the best soundtrack I've ever heard. It's not one of those coasters where I got off and I'm like, whoa, that was mind-blowingly intense. But it does have some sweet moments like the 2 large camelbacks and a handful of fun inversions. The launches still suck though, just have to throw that out there. Number 17, Wodan Timber Coaster at Europa Park. This is a ride that I've moved up the more and more I've thought about it. With how much I've raved about this coaster, there's no reason for it to not have a high spot in my favorite wooden coasters list. And it's also certainly one of the best coasters in Europe. Wodan Timber Coaster has some of the best pacing on any ride by GCI, and the forces it packs in are exceptional. I swear there is no dead space on this ride and no points where you even have time to catch your breath. And if that wasn't enough, Europa Park decked this ride out with theming, which only makes me love it even more. More people need to be talking about Wodan Timber Coaster because it is an incredible ride. Number 16, Tornado at Bakken. If you haven't heard my story with this ride before, well, you're in for a treat. My first ever ride on Tornado was the normal way to ride. That's what most visitors in the park will experience. But once the ride operators found out that I was making a video, they decided to have some fun with us. Wow, that sounded wrong. What they were able to do was enable something called boost mode, which, to put it in short, would be absolutely illegal in America. They unlocked the spinning, sped up the lift chain, deactivated the mid-course brake runs, and that all resulted in perhaps the most intense coaster rides I've ever experienced. And that's why Tornado was able to make it so high on my list. I can't imagine it being this high for many others. But to me, this was a blowout for best roller coaster in Denmark. If it's a quiet day and you ask nicely to ride Tornado on steroids, they may honor your request and try to kill you with it. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I love this experience so friggin' much. Number 15, Shambhala at Portaventura. Over in Europe, roller coasters from manufacturer B&M aren't nearly as common as they are in America, but that doesn't mean they don't have some great ones, and Shambhala is by far one of the best B&Ms in the world. Josiah of National Coasters and I both agree that this would probably be the quintessential perfect coaster for any member of the general public, and I would not blame those people in the slightest because we, as diehard enthusiasts, had so much fun with this ride. Shambhala is filled to the brim with floater airtime hills, and these moments seem to last forever. It's also one of the smoothest coasters ever, and that color scheme might be my new favorite I've seen thus far. This is a beautiful and amazing ride. Number 14, Let Coaster at Legendia. The coaster that really put Poland on the map for coaster enthusiasts, Let Coaster is one insane ride. Probably one of the most intense roller coasters I've ever ridden, and I do not say that lightly. When it rides 131 feet tall and is able to pack in this much force and this many elements, it's extraordinary. It's actually a fairly similar ride to Phoenix at Fair Up Summerland, but this one came first, and I don't think Vekoma intended for it to be so intense. It's why many people were actually disappointed with Phoenix, which I don't think is fair because these two rides are a night and day difference in terms of intensity. But I love that sort of thing, so Let Coaster ranks very highly for me. It's just one of those coasters I have to take a break from every now and then because otherwise I feel like I actually could pass out. Number 13, Red Force at Ferrariland.
What? Bro, what are you talking about?
I know, this might seem like a pretty high spot for Red Force, but hear me out. If you're familiar with my obsession with the Intamin Strata coasters, then this should make a lot of sense. Red Force has its launch, its giant top hat, an enormous drop, and that sends you into the brake run. It's an extremely short ride, yes, but it is so exhilarating and so intense that I don't mind at all. That launch is one of my favorites I've ever experienced in the front row, and at 111 miles per hour, it is the fastest coaster in the world to use LSM technology. Additionally, it claims the height and speed record for the entire continent of Europe, which is no small feat. For me personally, Red Force is not just a stat monster, it is so much more. It's a ride that lives up to its intimidating stature, and that's why it made the top 15. Number 12, Fly Fantasyland. We're only at spot number 12, yet I'd argue that each of the following rides are perfect or nearly perfect experiences. Fly is the prototype Vekoma flying coaster, and what they managed to pack into this tiny footprint is unlike anything we've ever seen. Launches on a flying coaster? Check. Airtime on a flying coaster? Oh yeah. Incredible sustained positives. Like, it's amazing. Not to mention, this ride is some of the greatest theming I've ever seen on a coaster, which rounds up the experience so much. It's funny, I always thought from off-ride, Fly looked kinda slow and kinda sluggish, but when you're riding it, speed is the last thing on your mind, and it doesn't feel slow or anything. Every single one of these elements feels like it's being taken at the right pace, and that's why Fly was able to blow my expectations out of the water. Number 11, Hyperion at Energylandia. If Let Coaster put Poland on the map, then Hyperion made it a must-visit for every coaster enthusiast out there. Energylandia for a few years had been under the radar until bam, 2018 rolled around and they showed us that they meant business. Hyperion is the second tallest roller coaster in Europe with a drop of 269 feet. This thing is nearly a gigacoaster, it's so tall, but it's not just about the stats, it's about the layout in this case. Hyperion has a perfect layout for a hypercoaster, with your typical out and back elements in the first half before transitioning into a twister layout in the second half. What's also cool is at times Hyperion throws in elements that you don't normally see on a ride like this, including a huge dive loop and the super fast stangle dives that throw you around like a ragdoll. It does have a few elements in the middle that aren't amazing in my opinion, and the ride does shake you around a tiny bit, but these are the only complaints of getting real nitpicky. I think otherwise it would have been a top 10 coaster in Europe, maybe even higher, but as is, it's an incredible experience. Number 10, Expedition G-Force at Holiday Park. This one was a tough call for me because Expedition G-Force doesn't have the variety of something like Hyperion, but in my opinion, the airtime on here is some of the strongest in the world, and the setting is a notch better with riders flying through the trees. To put things into perspective, designer Werner Stengel, who is responsible for much of the best Intamin coasters built around the world, said Expedition G-Force was the company's magnum opus. This may have been all the way back in 2001, but for me, this is still number 2 for best coasters in Germany and top 10 in the entirety of Europe. I love how aggressive this ride is as it chucks you out of your seat over every single hill, and even after all these years, it's running like a dream. Expedition G-Force remains a world-class coaster. Number 9, Wildfire at Kolmarden. RMC has so far only built 3 coasters in Europe, and it's funny because even though Wildfire is my least favorite of the 3, it's still in my overall top 25 favorite coasters I've ever been on. And hopefully that speaks to the quality of all the following rides because it means they have to be one of my top 25 favorite coasters. Wildfire is straight up one of the most beautiful and simultaneously daunting rides I've ever seen. It stands 183.8 feet tall, so it is the tallest wooden coaster in the world, and it's also got the most inversions at 3. Now, as much as I do love this ride, I will point out that it has some noticeable pacing issues. The first half may as well be the best of what RMC has to offer, but after that, the ride dwindles out considerably. It's not as bad once it's warmed up, but if Wildfire is running slow, I'd refrain from judging it too hard. But for the most part, its layout is incredibly strong, and the ride setting is one of the prettiest I've seen, so it's still absolutely deserving of a top 10 spot. Number 8, Der Schwarze Cannon at Hansa Park. My top rated coaster, anywhere in the country of Germany, is this demented one-of-a-kind ride manufactured by Gerstlauer. You see this tower? The inside of that is a 219 foot tall drop. And wait till you find out what else happens in there. Der Schwarze Cannon has some wicked surprises that I'm not going to spoil here just in case some of you plan to ride it in the future. But everything that happens outdoor is a high-speed blitz where you have hardly any idea what's going on. The pacing is super fast and you are being thrown around. I wish I could draw some comparisons to another coaster for you guys, but there really isn't another ride that can compare to this one. It's so unique, so well themed, and so intense from start to finish. Number 7, Toutatis at Parc Asterix. Can we take a second to congratulate France on finally getting an elite coaster? Seriously, Toutatis is amazing, and coming from a diehard Pantheon fan, it turned out just as good if not better. For starters, Parc Asterix went crazy on the theming. This presentation is top notch. Secondly, I love this layout so much. It has loads of variety in terms of forces, and it even does some of it backwards. Just look at my face, that should tell you all you need to know. Aside from the drop, I really love all of the elements in the second half and how diverse they make the layout. Toutatis goes from one element to another so seamlessly without leaving any time to breathe, and if that's what you're looking for in a coaster, I can promise that you'll go crazy for this ride. Number 6, 6, Conda at Walibi, Belgium. This is basically the modern, refined version of Expedition G-Force, which already made the top 10, but the way Conda is able to enhance it and add on to its variety makes it my favorite traditional mega/hyper coaster in the world. Its large camelbacks give extremely satisfying doses of airtime, and the smaller hills at the end are all sharper pops. This is exactly the variety I'm looking for when it comes to airtime, and Conda excels at it. The only element I think they could have done better is the non-inverting Cobra roll, but that had never been done before, and for a prototype element, it actually turned out quite good in my opinion. It is the weakest part of an otherwise flawless ride though. It actually hurts my brain that I have to place 5 coasters higher than Conda because it is one of the most enjoyable roller coasters I've been on in my life. Number 5, Untamed at Walibi, Holland. The first RMC Europe got was an absolute banger, and if people are calling Untamed a miniature steel vengeance, well, that's all the proof you need. The sheer amount of times this coaster flings you up into your lap bar is awesome, and I love all the different shapes and sizes of the hills too. There's larger hills that tilt you outward, little hills that slant slightly to the left giving laterals, and several more configurations that do an amazing job tossing you airborne. And with this being an RMC iBox coaster, it is as smooth as glass, so enjoying all of Untamed's sweet airtime is very, very easy. For me, this is a 10 out of 10 perfect coaster, but it just doesn't have the variety of a few rides I have placed higher. Number 4, Taiga at Linnanmäki. Since its debut in 2019, people have been raving over Taiga, saying you have to come to Finland to try it out. And already, before writing, I knew I would love this ride because it has so many similarities to my favorite launch coasters out there. Sure enough, Taiga became one of those rides. Due to the terrain it sits on, it's able to keep an astounding pace the whole way through, except for the moments where it's intentionally going slow, like on the 0G winder and stall elements. You know, typically I'm not a huge fan of hang time, but even I'll admit that those two moments are awesome. It's really in the second half though where Taiga lets its foot off the gas. Every single moment does something to advance the ride experience, whether it be a burst of airtime, a quick direction change, a whippy inversion, or anything else. I got half a dozen rides in on Taiga, and I could have kept going for twice or 3 times as much without needing a break. It's one of the most amazing ride experiences Intamin's ever done, and so stupidly re-rideable too. Number 3, Batman Gotham City Escape at Parque Warner Madrid. One of Intamin's new best creations, Batman bundles together awesome elements, pacing, layout, theming, and everything else I'm looking for in a good roller coaster. It's filled with surprise elements of airtime, some of which literally take place while you're sideways, and I mentioned I'm not a big fan of hang time, but the last inversion on this ride has perhaps my favorite moment of hang time I've ever felt. And of course, it would be rude of me to ignore Parque Warner's efforts to theme this coaster. It would have already been one of the best rides in Europe, but what they did in terms of presentation, ambiance, and thematics is what solidified this ride as one of my favorites ever, period. It's hard to think of anything they could have done to make this ride better, and the fact that we still have 2 coasters to go is mind-boggling to me. Number 2, Zadra at Energylandia. Depending on personal preference, this could be the best coaster in the world manufactured by RMC. For me, it is still in the cards, but it's honestly so hard to say after riding so many incredible rides that they've done. What I can say for sure is Zadra is a powerhouse from beginning to end. It has pacing like no other coaster I've seen, as it charges over every hill and zips through every other element at lightning fast speeds. I thought this coaster rode fairly unique compared to other RMCs because not only did it have the airtime and sense of speed that I knew to expect, but it also mixed in some awesome laterals. And at times, Zadra will combine all 3 of these sensations into one, and that is one of the best feelings in the world. It's only been 2 years and I'm already itching to get back on this thing, and I'll tell you what, if this were the only coaster at this park, I'd still fly to Poland alone to experience it. But now let's wrap things up with a ride that means the world to me, my number 1 favorite roller coaster in Europe and overall, it's Guterix at Park Asterix. Just kidding, I actually hate that ride. It's the Ride to Happiness at Plopsaland in Belgium. This ride feels magical is the best way I can start. Everything it does feels perfect, and because it has these spinning vehicles, every ride feels different from the last. It's like you're riding a different roller coaster every time because these elements are so different forwards and backwards, not to mention the fact that you might get a combination of both of these sometimes. Mock rides included every element they knew would make a world-class coaster, elements that would already be insane on their own, but factor in the rotations and it turns a great ride into the best on the planet. And what I love so much about what Plopsaland did here is they not only themed it and presented it beautifully, but were able to sync electric dance music to the ride via onboard audio. This adds so much to the experience and makes the ride feel almost euphoric. Frankly, there's nothing more I can say that hasn't already been said because I'm struggling to find the words I'm looking for. But I hope that each and every single one of you guys get the chance to go to Belgium and ride what isn't just the best coaster in Europe, but my favorite coaster I've been on anywhere on Earth. So I appreciate you all sticking with me for this one, as it took a long time to edit, and I'm sure the video turned out to be pretty long too. The best way you can show your support is by leaving this video a like and subscribing to Coaster Dash, and in return, more content just like this will be on its way in the future. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye guys.